Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the online lecture series of CEC-UGC. This lecture is about Alice in Wonderland, the 19th century novel, and this is in continuation with of our discussion that we did in the previous lecture. We established that how it was it's a text that was written in 1865 by Lewis Carroll. It's an English novel written at the time of Victorianism, and we discussed that how it is a classic example of a particular style of writing, that is literary nonsense. We also saw that how it's a parody of Victorianism and how it also belongs to the genre of children's literature. So in the last lecture we looked at the concept of literary nonsense, but now let's see that how does this novel subscribe to this style of writing. Now the beginning of the novel actually presents a very improbable setting, and we also notice a word inversion. So two things over here. First of all, the improbable setting is one of the characteristic features of nonsense, as I established even before. And the second, word inversion, also indicates that how there's a play with language that is part of this kind of writing, and we see that right in the beginning of the novel. Let's very quickly look at this quotation where we notice this. Now the character says, "How funny it will seem to come out among the people that walk with their head downwards." So what is happening over here? It is Alice who has just now slipped down the rabbit hole, and she has reached a world that is full of fantasy, and it's very different from the reality. And this is the observation that she makes. She says, "How funny it will seem to come out among the people that walk with their head downwards. The antipathies, I think." And the author says she was rather glad that there was no one listening, as it did not sound at all the right word. So what is happening? So these are the words that Alice utters when she is on her way down to the fantasy world. Now she's of course slipped and she does not know where will she land, but while she is on her way down, she actually notices a lot of curious things around her. So there's this tunnel of which she's a part. She sees that how the walls have coffee table books, the walls have libraries, there are different creatures over there. So that really of course amazes her because it has got nothing in common with the kind of world that she is familiar with. So there's something extremely fantasy-like in what she's experiencing. So at that time, she kind of thinks to herself that how funny it will be that if she comes out amongst a group of people who actually walk with their head downwards. So what is happening? Now, being a part of the world where people don't walk on their feet, but they actually are walking on their head, clearly shows what? There's a completely improbable setting which the author has presented over here. And she says, the antipathies, I think. Now the word antipathy that she is using over here is completely out of context. It just does not make any sense. And the author also actually alerts the reader to this in that little note that he gives in the brackets, when he says that she was rather glad that there was no one listening, as it did not sound at all the right word. So again, not using the correct word or playing with the language is what we see in this reference. At another point, she mentions, and I quote, "Curiouser and curiouser," cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for the moment she forgot how to speak good English. Now again, what is happening? This is a second instance of where Alice completely inverts or distorts the word. Now, is there a word as curiouser? Of course not. In actual English, in dictionary verifiable English, we have the word curious, we have the word curiosity, but we do not have the word curiouser, right? But in the novel, she says curiouser and curiouser, and that's the time the author again makes a point, or the narrator, we can call it, makes a point, and he says that she was so much surprised that for the moment she forgot how to speak good English. Now, is it good English or is it English at all? That's the question that the author is, presenting over here. And this then tells us that how this novel is very much part of the literary nonsense. Now, after the fact of inverted words and an improbable situation, the second thing that we also notice in this novel is how the usual course of logic is completely inverted in this text. Now, what do we mean by usual course of logic? It means that whatever the conventional understanding is, whatever your conventional worldview is, all of that is completely thrown out of the window. Now, there is this one incident somewhere in the third chapter of this novel where now Alice has finally landed in this Wonderland and she is looking around. There are multiple doors around her, but all of them are locked. And then she finds this golden key that's kept on a table, and she wonders that which door could that key be for. And finally what she sees is that there's this very small door. It is so small that Alice can only peep through it, but she cannot even try to enter. So once she opens the door through that key, with that key, she sees a very beautiful garden, a very beautiful land on the other side. But of course she is not able to enter because she is too big for that door. So then she feels like, she wonders what if she was able to find a way of getting through that door, because she's so curious to see what lies on the other side, to experience the beauty of which she gets a glimpse. Next, what happens is she finds a bottle which with a tag that says "Drink me." So it has some potion, some liquid, and that when she drinks, she feels that her body begins to appear in very different proportions. So what happens? That her upper part gets elongated and the lower part remains as it is. So because of that, the distance between her head and the foot is way too large. Okay, and what she does when she notices this absolutely weird occurrence, she starts talking to the foot, and that feels far. That feels very, very far from her neck, which has grown inordinately tall. So when she is addressing the foot, when she is, so to say, talking to her own foot, she immediately becomes conscious of it, and she says, "Oh dear, what nonsense am I talking?" Again, notice the word nonsense, right? So even the character then, like, we see that how the presence of nonsense is so very prominent in the text. It's not just a reader's interpretation, but even the writer has very distinctly placed these elements in the novel. Another instance which kind of contributes to the fact that how the course of logic is inverted is that there's a point where Alice is extremely disappointed because she is not able to get through the door still. Despite trying a lot of things, she is not able to get through the door. So what happens is that she begins to cry. Now, when she begins to cry, she sheds a lot of tears. Now, see, what does the author say? The author says, and I quote, "Shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool around her about 4 inches deep." What is happening? Here's a character who is distraught, who is sad and is crying, and she's cried so much that she now is sitting in the pool of her own tears. This is, of course, this is exactly what we mean by fantasy. This is exactly what we mean by the author, completely inverting the logic that we are aware of otherwise. Now, the third thing that we also notice in Alice in Wonderland that contributes to this text being that of literary nonsense is that we see that how conventional facts and understanding are also questioned. Okay. Now, there's this quotation where Alice is trying to figure whether she remembers anything of the world that she has come from. Now, she is of course aware that how she is part of a wonderland which is completely different from the kind of life that she has led or the kind of world that she is actually part of. So when she's trying hard to make sense of it, she says, okay, let me just try to recall my geographical sense as it had existed before I slipped down the rabbit hole. And what does she say? And I quote, she says, I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. London is the capital of Paris and Paris is the capital of Rome, unquote. Now, what is happening? When she tries to, recall her geography, all that she says makes no sense. Now, London, of course, we know is not the capital of Paris, and Paris is, not the capital of Rome. So, what is happening? The conventional facts also then are inverted in this text. Another feature that we notice in this novel of literary nonsense are the riddles. Remember, in the first lecture, I told you that how riddles are another important part of or characteristic feature of this kind of writing. Now, riddles are actually rendered absurd in the text as they have no answers, and this is a stock feature of literary nonsense. Now, there's a point when Alice meets a caterpillar. So, when you read the text, you will see that how Alice meets different creatures, and most of them are animals. Okay, those creatures are they speak, they talk. In fact, the word which a lot of critics use to define these creatures are anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic means that they have human-like qualities. They behave like humans while they are actually animals. So one such creature that she meets over there is a caterpillar, and he seems to present a riddle. Let's see what he says. He says, one side will make you grow taller and the other side shorter. Now, Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom and trying to make out which were the two sides of it as it was round, unquote. So, what's happening? Now, in the story, caterpillar points towards a mushroom and, he says that one side will make you taller and the other side will make you shorter. So, what does this indicate? Now, this was a time when Alice was really agitated, that sometimes she grew extremely tall, sometimes she shrunk to a very small size in this wonderland, and that had really annoyed her. So, caterpillar then asks her to observe that mushroom, and he says that one side of it will make you tall and the other side will make you short. Alice observes it and she sees that how a mushroom is round. So, something that is round, how can we talk about one side and the other? Now, this Alice is not able to make sense of, and again, what does it do? Again, it contributes to the form of literary nonsense, and this is where this episode ends, and there is no more to it, right? Now, yet another thing that we must say. Now, of course, as I said, that how literary nonsense does not only have elements which don't make sense, but at the same time, there are parts which make meaning, which have loaded meaning, and then there are those parts where meaning is distorted. Now, let's very quickly look at the fact that how in this text as well we see sense amidst nonsense. Now, there is a conversation where Alice has with another creature called Cheshire Cat. Now, Alice wants to go somewhere and she's feeling lost. She asks the Cheshire Cat, what should I do? Now, this little exchange between both of them is very loaded. Now, let's look at their words. Alice says, would you please tell me which way I ought to go from here? The Cheshire Cat responds that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. Alice says, I don't much care where, so long as I get somewhere. And the cat replies, oh, you are sure to do that if you only walk long enough. Now, what's happening? Alice wants to go to a particular place. Now, that she is not aware of. Now, the cat says that so long as you are ready to walk long enough, you will definitely reach somewhere. Now, what does this indicate? This very clearly indicates the fact of how when we try hard enough, when we put in as much effort, we do arrive at a conclusion, we do arrive at a place that we really want to be. So even as this conversation is between Alice and cat, but you notice that how it makes so much sense. It has so much more to say about real life as well. Now, there's this very important critic who's talked about literary nonsense, and he's called Wim Tiggers, and he's written this book called Anatomy of Literary Nonsense. Now, talking about this style, he says that it's a genre of narrative literature which balances a multiplicity of meaning with a simultaneous absence of meaning. So, notice the word over here, multiplicity of meaning. So, multiplicity is actually occurring simultaneously with an absence of meaning. And we just now saw in this exchange between the cat and the Alice that how there is a lot of meaning as well to the text, while of course it coexists with those portions that do not make as much sense. And he says that this balance is effected by playing with rules of language, logic, prosody and representation, or a combination of these. And in order to be successful, nonsense must at the same time invite the reader to interpretation. Now, what is of importance that Tim over here is highlighting is the fact, Wim that's highlighting, is the fact that how there's sense and nonsense both which occur simultaneously. All right, we come to now the next critical point that we should be aware of about this text by Lewis Carroll, that is how Alice in Wonderland is a parody of Victorianism. Now, if we see what is British Victorianism, it's actually the age characterized by this the rule of Queen Victoria from 1819 to 1901. All right. Now, 19th century England was actually an England was actually a time when England was a colonial power. It was a time when the English subjected people in different countries, and they carried out large-scale exploitation of resources of the world as well, right? So this was one characteristic feature of Victorianism. Around this time, we also see, because of this colonial enterprise, England also starts looking up. It dreams about progress, developments, and there's no intensity to or there's no intention to fight deprivation at home. Okay. The other very important development around this time, which we associate with Victorianism, is that the middle class was coming into being, and it almost strengthened as a social group, right? It was a section that uncritically accepted the viewpoints of the upper classes. Now, all of these things actually have a direct reference to how these values then stand parodied in the text as well. Now, if we notice that there was a certain kind of an annoyance which had occurred amongst the authors with the behavior of the middle class. Now, middle class was that section which was shallow, which kind of looked down upon their inferiors and always wanted to be like those who were above them. So they were actually caught in this position of shallowness, right? So therefore, this is one of the characteristic features of Victorianism, right? And this annoyance with this social section then could be one of the reasons that the authors tried to kind of articulate their sentiment through fantasy and nonsense. Now, if we look at the defining aspects of Victorian attitudes, we see that the words propriety, complacency, smugness, shallowness and hypocrisy are what define the cultural values. Now, smugness and complacency means that England was very self-satisfied at this time. Why? For the simple reason, because of the colonial enterprise, and they were exploiting resources of the other places, and they were gaining wealth. So that gave a sense of complacency and self-satisfaction at this time. The other thing, of course, I pointed out is shallowness. So all these features then started to came to define the Victorian set of values, and all these actually stand parodied by Lewis Carroll. Now let's very quickly take a look how. There's an episode in the novel where all animals are wet, and the mouse, one of the animals amongst them, suggests that he can dry them. Okay, now in this episode, the words uttered by mouse are clearly indicate it's like he's making fun of the political scenario over there. Let's very quickly look at his words. The mouse says, "I'll soon make you dry enough. Listen to me. This is the driest thing I know." Now notice these words. This is the driest thing I know. William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders and had been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Now, of course, in one go, you might feel that, oh, what is this? This is too involved a statement. So two things are happening over here, friends. First of all, yes, the meaning over here is scripted. Why? Because nonsense. It is a literature of nonsense. But at the same time, some parts we are able to identify, and we see that how he's talking about conquest. He's talking about conquering, and he's saying that how this is the driest thing I know. What is happening? This is a direct comment on the English colonial enterprise, which was in its heyday at the time of Queen Victoria's reign. Okay. Now, the other point that we notice where Victorianism stands criticized is that Alice actually attends a few social events in the Wonderland, and one of this event is a mad tea party. Now, despite not having been invited, Alice actually becomes an intruder in the party. She's not invited. They're all creatures who are part of this tea party, but still she by force becomes a part of the social event. And let's very quickly look at this reference from the text. She says, the creatures say, "No room, no room," which means what? No space for you. Okay, they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. What's happening? We very clearly see over here Alice trying to forcefully become a part of somebody else's territory, trying to forcefully be at a place where she is not meant to be. What's again happening? That's exactly what the British colonialists also did. They were occupying lands where they were not invited. They were occupying lands that they had nothing to do with. So all these elements then are parodied as we see in the text. Now, in this essay by Daniel Bivona, which is titled "Alice, the Child Imperialist and the Games of Wonderland," Bivona actually makes a very important point. He says that these events, they actually reflect the customs and traditions of the invaded land. Now, Wonderland is being disrupted by Alice, who does not accept the native rules, and therefore it manifests her ethnocentric behavior. So just what I told you, that how Alice then is forcefully making her way into the Wonderland, into spaces in Wonderland where she is not invited, and this has a direct parallel in the colonial enterprise of the Britishers during the Victorian times, and Lewis Carroll then seems to be making fun of it, right? So all these elements then help us figure that how this text is also a parody of Victorianism. Coming to the third and the last point, that is how Alice in Wonderland is a text of children's literature as well. Now, there's a very popular critic called Peter Hollindale, and he discusses how children's books create a space where adulthood and childhood can meet and mingle. So, as I was also telling you in the beginning, that how children's literature is not only meant for a child's reading. There is a very clear sense of the fact that how adulthood and childhood seem to mingle. So there is stuff for an adult to make sense of, while at the same time there are elements in a children's text which also appears to a child. So in these texts then there's potentiality of childhood is actually seen to coalesce with insights about the adult world. And all these elements we see even in Alice in Wonderland. Now over here, of course, when we look at the child aspect of it, we see there's fantasy. We see that how there's a young girl slipping down the rabbit hole, meeting these weird creatures. So this really fascinates a child reader. But when an adult approaches this text, what is there for him to understand? We clearly see that how the adult then understands the shortcomings of Victorianism or the time of 19th century. So we see that how a text of children's literature, which is Alice in Wonderland, has something for both the child and the adult reader. Likewise, a similar quote is mentioned by C. Walter Hodges. He also discusses the imaginative power of children's literature. So this is another very important segment or important feature of children's writing, that is imagination. And we have seen right in the beginning and through our discussion of the two parts of the lecture that how imagination and fantasy is at the heart of this text. Okay, so again, imagination then also is extremely enabling, as Hodges points out. Now, we might also wonder that what purpose does fantasy or this imagination or dreaming fulfill? It definitely entertains the young reader. At the same time, dreaming, we must not forget, is a way of opening up alternate realities. What do we do when we dream? We actually think of that which does not exist but which can exist, right? So dreaming then is a very, very political or a very, very important ploy used by a lot of writers, and particularly writers of children's fiction. Now, Alice in the text also says that when I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened, and now here I am in the middle of one. Again, in this quote, what happens? That the distinction between the fairyland and reality is very clearly established. And then the novel actually ends with this very beautiful quotation by Alice's sister, where once Alice is back to the usual world, out from the Wonderland, her sister imagines Alice as this old woman who will then one day be telling the tale to her children, right? Now, in that, she says that she would gather about her other children and make their eyes bright and eager with the dream of a Wonderland long ago, and how she would feel with all their simple sorrows and find pleasure in all their simple joys, remembering her own child life and happy summer days, unquote. So what's happening? The idea of pleasure, the idea of dreaming, the idea of how the dream associates with a point of time which no longer exists and a point of time which could exist. All these elements then form a part of children's literature that we see in Alice in Wonderland. So friends, we approach this text from three perspectives. From the perspective of the form of literary nonsense, we saw that how there's also a parody of Victorianism, and we explored Alice in Wonderland from the point of view of it being a text of children's literature. When you read it, you will see how fascinating it is, how fascinating the descriptions are. There are illustrations which are also, part of the novel. As you will see, these pictures, they appear in the first picture. You see Alice that is really big in size. In the second picture, Alice has been shrunk into a very small size, and the dog, appears to be almost like a giant. And you see this pattern poetry. Now, this pattern actually presents, the tail of a mouse. So when you read, you will notice that how all these elements contribute to this text being an extremely fascinating read. Thank you.